In this episode of the Think Wildlife podcast, I interview 𝘼𝙗𝙪𝙣𝙗, who is a Postdoctoral Associate in Recovery Ecology at the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. Dr. Adi also leads the Giant Otter Project at the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit at the University of Oxford. We talk about the conservation of giant otters in the Peruvian Amazon River and the threats faced by the species. We also talk about the extensive research work which RD has been involved in. Tune in to listen more and do not forget to share and subscribe to this podcast. Welcome, RD, to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on here.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
What got you interested in studying otters?
I think otters are, first of all, they are charismatic animals. The way they move, the way they look, the way they behave. They have all kinds of behaviors that makes us identify with them. Like, for example, the North American river otter does the poop dance. And so that's one of the things that attracted me to me. Second, they are carnivores, so they occupy high trophic level, and that makes them kind of sensitive for what's going on in their environment. And this is especially important because they occupy freshwater ecosystems, which are in decline throughout the world. And third thing, a lot of otters are of conservation concern. And so I think a lot of us that are involved in ecology and evolution want to do something that makes a difference in the world, and want to be involved in things that can actually have conservation value.
Two species you have worked extensively with are the giant and river otters. So could you just talk a bit about these two species, how are they different, where are they found, and what is their conservation status?
Okay, so I did my doctorate a while ago about the North American river otter. And this is a species with quite a wide distribution along North America. It occurs in most of the part of the US and Canada, and where we studied them was in Alaska. This was a coastal population that lives in the sea. And it's not really of conservation concern at the moment, especially except for some specific populations. But the main threats to its sort of existence are one, trapping. A lot of people try to capture them for the fur. And second is habitat destruction. As I said, many rivers and lakes and creeks are being degraded by human activity.
Could you just talk a bit about the research you did for your PhD?
Right. So the research, like I said, was in a research system in coastal Alaska, more in areas like Prince William Sound and Kodiak that are by the sea. And over there, the North American river otters have adapted to live in the sea. And we think that this is because they have a lot of food there. There are a lot of schooling fish and rockfish that they and these populations of fish makes it possible for them to live there. The aspects of their ecology that we studied more specifically were one is a few aspects of their behavior, their sociality, and their signaling behavior. So how many otters are usually found in a group, what determines their sort of decisions of joining and separating from group, their fission fusion dynamics, as we call it. And the other aspect was their signaling behavior. So these otters communicate with each other in latrines, which are places on the coast that they go to, and they leave feces and urine that seem to have some meaning for other animals. And while they do it, they also do a little display that we call the poop dance. So I studied most of the aspects of this signaling behavior. And basically what's interesting about this system is that this signaling behavior mediates the decisions to join and separate from groups. And so there's a relationship between what happens in the latrines and their social structure. And the other aspect is more like population ecology. So we were interested in understanding how trapping and hunting impact river otter populations on more on like a macro level. So what we did was we, from their feces, we extracted DNA, sorry, and used spatially explicit capture-recapture models to estimate densities and to see how river otter populations are doing over time, and also how they are doing in areas that get trapped as opposed to adjacent areas that do not get trapped, to see if there's a source sink dynamic there. And so also because we had data that has been collected since 2002, we were able to get a perspective of these river otter populations over time, which coincides with changes in the North Pacific. As we know right now, the North Pacific is in one of its hottest periods in history. The sea surface temperatures this year have climbed considerably, but we had about 5 points over time in which we were able to calculate river otter densities and to see if periods when the sea surface temperature rises coincide with lower river otter populations.
So now for your postdoctoral project, you're working on the Otter Project at the University of Oxford. So could you just talk about this project and how it came into being?
I started a position of a postdoctoral associate in the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance in 2017. I was recruited as a postdoc, and my mission was to start a conservation program to study giant otters in Peru. And so the idea was to sort of quantify the effects of what is going on outside protected areas, especially gold mining, on giant otter populations. And this project is also associated with the Wild Crow Unit as the University with the University of Oxford. Since then, in 2022, I finished my postdoc and became a research associate. And so we've gotten some funding also from the People's Trust from Endangered Species, but mostly from the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. And we're able to establish a long-term project in which we come back twice every year and monitor giant otter groups that live in oxbow lakes, which are lakes that are narrow and elongated and have a lot of fish resources in which the giant otters are interested. And we have a paired sort of controlled treatment design in this project where we look at 12 oxbow lakes inside protected areas, especially Manu National Park, and 10 oxbow lakes outside protected areas that are exposed to human activities, like gold mining in their banks and like commercial fishing inside the water. And so by looking at the behavior and at the demography of giant otters in these oxbow lakes, we are able to understand what happens as a result of human activity.
What are the main threats faced by the giant otters in the area you're working in?
Right. So giant otters around the start of the 20th century and until the 1970s were hunted for their fur. It used to be very valued in some markets. But since then, in 1973, they were the commerce of their fur was banned by the CITES convention, and so since then hunting has gone down, and it's at the moment it's not considered a severe threat. But what is happening in so giant otters have a distribution in 5 or 6 countries around the Amazon. Their main range is in Brazil, but there's also giant otters in Ecuador and Bolivia and Venezuela and Colombia. And so what happens in the range is mostly it's rivers and lakes that are surrounded by tropical forest. And the main threat to them is the destruction of this forest and the use of these rivers and lakes for transportation and for access to places where resources are abundant for humans. And one of the main things that we specifically look at is gold mining. And so the rivers make it easier for people to access areas where they can do gold mining. And when they get to these areas, they dig in the banks and destroy them. And they also contaminate the water with mercury. And so what it creates after gold mining is done is some sort of, compared to what was there before, is like a desert, is a few mounds of gravel and sediment. And all of the complexity, all of the vegetation that was there before is destroyed. And so that becomes a suboptimal, not so good habitat for giant otters, and we see it as a pretty major threat. But one optimistic thing that I can say is that even despite all of this activity and all of this habitat destruction, we found giant otters in all of the areas where we studied that are also gold mined. It just seems that they are there in lower densities, and this is suboptimal habitat for them. And so there's hope. There are populations of giant otters if we protect these areas from destructive human activities.
Beyond otters, what has been the greater impact of gold mining on the areas you're working in Manu National Park and surrounding areas?
We looked at what happens with satellite mining data. We looked at what happens in the banks. Up to 50% of the bank areas that surround oxbow lakes and rivers can be destroyed and become forest clearings as a result of gold mining. There's also abundant evidence that both the sediment and the water get contaminated with mercury, which at some levels can be toxic. We shown evidence also that the biomass of fish and the species richness of fish is considerably reduced outside protected areas, and we think also it's not completely 100% as a result of gold mining. Some of these effects are indirect, but we think that this is the main driver of this reduction in fish resources. And of course, this also indirectly affects giant otters because they rely mostly on fish for their diet. And then a few more things that we've quantified are bird communities. So bird communities are also less rich, and especially the birds that depend on freshwater ecosystems that need these microhabitats on the banks, on the forest, are the ones that are most sensitive to these activities. And so there are a whole series of different impacts on the freshwater ecosystems that we're seeing in our research system. And these are things that not a lot of people have quantified before us.
What is being done to conserve the giant otters?
Right. So a lot of people think that the main solution is tourism, is basically protecting areas where giant otters can be seen because they are charismatic animals. They are big. They can be observed in the open. And so in some places in the Amazon, including Peru and Manu National Park, they become a tourist attraction. So people go on boats and catamarans and go and observe the giant otters and what they do and their behavior. And this could be one solution to provide income to places where giant otters live in coexistence with humans. What we think is a lot of some of the areas in some of the areas there are more like hotspots where giant otters are more likely to be found. And so, for example, if this is an oxbow lake, then protecting the access to it, limiting the access, protecting its banks could be a solution to safeguard the giant otter groups within it. And then also in areas where, like I said, in bank areas where the vegetation is destroyed and there are differences in the geological processes, we can do restoration, we can replant trees and reforest, and therefore maybe get back some of the previous ecosystem services and some of the previous integrity of the system. And then finally, there are solutions that are like higher than our level, political and social solutions, because in the end of the day, people engage in gold mining because they have no other available ways to get income. And a lot of these people are also of limited education. And so investing in countries like Peru in their human capital can be also one of the solutions. Of course, this is not at the level of my project and my organization, but this is something that that we need to think of as well in general, also when we think about conservation problems. The human aspect, what happens to the human populations that are growing everywhere in the world, is definitely something important to consider.
In the Giant Otter Project, you guys are working with indigenous communities. Could you just talk about these projects with your...
So inside Manu National Park, there's one indigenous communities that overlap the Giant Otter range that we study. And so we try to understand their needs. So, for example, these people sometimes still subsist on fish and bushmeat. And so, of course, they are allowed to do their thing in the park, but we're trying to understand exactly how much fishing do they do and whether this impacts the giant otter population. Outside the park, there are communities that depend on gold mining. Actually, most of them are migrants that came from other areas to work in gold mining. And what we do is we have a presence in their schools, in primary and secondary schools, and we try to talk to the teachers and the kids to promote themes like environmental education, the importance of protected areas, what kind of animals are even found in this area. Most of them don't even know that there are giant otters just outside their door. And also solutions, how can we treat the environment more responsibly, for example, in terms of getting rid of refuse and garbage, for example, the kind of treatment that we can give to the water. We sometimes take them on field trips to observe birds and animals. And so the idea is that by communicating with the children, this will sort of trickle up to the adults, and hopefully our vision is that I mean, we're not naive. We still think there's going to be gold mining in some areas, but at least things will get done more responsibly.
Beyond otters, you have also done extensive research on Arabian wolves and the Russell's fox. So could you just talk about your work with these two species?
Right. So these are two species that are found in the desert in the southern part of Israel. So I'm originally from Israel. I studied my bachelor's and master's in Tel Aviv University. And through the people I've met there and the contacts I've created, I came to be part of of a project that studies the carnivore in the southern parts of Israel. And so one of the species that we've studied was the Arabian wolf, which is the top carnivore in this area. It's basically a subspecies of the gray wolf, but Arabian wolves don't look exactly like the wolves that we think of, like in Alaska and Canada, that they're big and lush and gray fur. They're more, they have a desert color, and they're much smaller. They can be about 30 or 35 kilograms. And these guys, a lot of their diet depends on the humans that live in the desert, because this is a very resource poor area. And so what we've studied in this project was how Arabian wolves, how long they spend around human habitation, and whether also the sort of natural resources, what they feed on outside the areas where humans inhabit, like gazelles, how much that determines their movement. And we found that they're actually very attracted to areas where humans live, probably because a very large part of their diet comes from it. And then the other species that we studied was the Ruppel's fox. The Ruppel's fox is one of the smaller foxes, can be maybe 2 or 3 kilograms. It's adapted to live in desert areas, sandy or rocky areas, but usually wide washes. And we were also interested in what happens with especially commensal species, because humans bring to this area, to this desert area, species like the red fox and the golden jackal. And these carnivores, which are larger and more dominant than the Ruppel's fox, can basically outcompete them and drive them to more remote areas. And so we were concerned about that. And what we found was that actually mostly what Ruppel's foxes try to avoid are trails and roads that are inhabited by humans. And that's maybe because of these carnivores.
Across your research career so far, what have been some of the biggest challenges you have faced?
Yeah, so the challenges are usually more related to working with people and having always in field teams having different characters and people that have potential to go into conflict. So one of the most important skills, I think, for someone like me that's a conservation biologist that leads fieldwork teams is people skills, is being able to understand what is happening in terms of the fabric of the people in the team and communicating things. So I think that's one of the important things. The other has been also working with different kinds of people that are whose interests are not always aligned with our interests. And so this is especially happens in areas where there is gold mining. And so it's important also, again, to communicate and to sort of foresee what can go wrong before it happens. And these are some of the lessons that I have from my career so far.
And my final question for this podcast is that how can individuals contribute to the conservation of giant and river otters?
Right. So like I said, this is more of like a social and economic problem. I would say maybe contributing to decrease inequality between countries in the world. What people could also do is contribute to NGOs and institutions that are engaged with conservation. So either donate or be involved with this sort of organization like the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. And we have a lot of partners that we work with in Peru, like the Frankfurt Zoological Society. Also, the gold market also affects gold mining, and so I don't know if this can be sort of pointed at the level of one simple person in the street who probably doesn't consume much gold. But in general, doing things that are more environmentally friendly, voting for people who are cognizant and recognize global environmental problems like climate change, so again, if a Western person hear this, they would think, what do I have to do with giant otters in the Amazon? But again, everything is connected, and so by being more responsible in the way you consume, in the way you get rid of the refuse, the garbage that you produce, electricity, water, all of these resources that are finite, you can contribute in general to world conservation, and in the end, this has effects, I believe, on freshwater ecosystems in the Amazon and on giant otters.
So thank you so much for your time. It is a pleasure speaking to you today.
Thank you. Pleasure.